power didn't save life. Power almost destroyed it until a cell built a control room. Because when a living thing gets stronger, it also gets louder. 2 billion years ago, far below the surface of an ancient ocean, a new kind of cell drifted through the dark. It was still microscopic, still invisible, but inside, something had changed. It could afford to be ambitious, and ambition always comes with a price. Imagine this cell as a tiny workshop floating in black water. The floor is crowded. Molecules bump shoulders like strangers in a packed subway. Chemical reactions spark and vanish in milliseconds. Ribosomes, those tireless builders, snap parts together without rest. Like workers on an assembly line that never sleeps. It's not quiet. It's not clean. It's a factory in the dark. And right in the middle of that chaos sits the cell's most valuable position. DNA, the instruction book, the only copy, the one thing it cannot replace. For a long time, that book just lay there, out in the open, in simpler cells. That wasn't a problem. The book was short. The recipes were basic. DNA makes a message, RNA and ribosomes grab it instantly and start building. Fast, efficient, good enough to survive. But this new cell had something its ancestors didn't: extra energy. With more energy, it started upgrading itself. More tools, more systems, more moving parts, and every new part demanded new instructions. More instructions meant more messages flying through the workshop like loose paper in a storm. Suddenly, the instruction book wasn't sitting in a quiet library. It was sitting in the middle of a crowded street. That's when the threats arrived. Quiet, ordinary looking, and lethal. A virus drifted past like an invisible burglar and slipped foreign code into the mix. A genetic copy and paste fragment jumped into the wrong sentence like a typo that changes the meaning of everything. A stray chemical reaction nicked the DNA like a tear in a blueprint. And the workshop didn't stop. It couldn't. Because ribosomes don't wait for perfection. They don't ask questions. They grab whatever message appears and they build. Sometimes they grab the message too early. Mid-copy, mid-edit, half-finished, and the cell produced proteins that were wrong, unstable, dangerous. In a world this small, there is no such thing as a harmless mistake. One bad batch isn't a glitch, it's a collapse. And that's the terrifying limit this cell finally hit. The more complex it became, the easier it was to break itself. So evolution did what it always does when chaos turns deadly. It didn't invent a miracle. It drew a line. A boundary began to form, quiet, guarded around the code. The protected space where instructions could be copied cleanly, checked, and only then released into the noise of the factory floor. Not for comfort, for survival. Picture that early complex cell like a tiny workshop floating in black water. Inside, everything is moving. Molecules slam into each other like people in a crowded subway. Machines, ribosomes snap parts together without taking a breath. Chemistry is happening everywhere, all at once. And right in the middle of that chaos, the cell's entire life story is just sitting there. DNA, not locked away, not protected, just exposed. Like the only copy of a priceless book left on a factory floor. At first, the cell gets away with it. But as it grows more powerful, the room gets louder. A virus drifts by like a pickpocket and slips in fake instructions. A chemical accident nicks the code. A message gets copied wrong. And the ribosomes don't wait for corrections. They grab whatever message appears and start building immediately. Fast, blind, impatient. Sometimes they grab the message too soon. Mid copy, half finished, and the cell ends up making broken proteins. Tools that don't work, parts that jam the system. In a tiny cell, there is no room for small errors. One bad batch can be a death sentence. So, evolution does something that feels almost human. It starts cleaning up the room. The cell's membrane, soft and flexible like living fabric, begins to fold inward, not perfectly, not all at once, more like a slow instinct. Pulls the valuables away from the crowd. A loose curtain forms near the DNA, then another fold, then another, and little by little, the instruction book disappears behind a boundary, not a prison, a protected room. But the cell cannot lock DNA away completely. The factory still needs recipes. The builders still need orders. So the boundary grows doors. Tiny guarded gates, nuclear ports, not open holes. More like security checkpoints. Some things pass, some don't. Information leaves only when it's ready. And that's the real turning point. For the first time, a cell separates writing from building. Inside the new room, messages can be copied calmly, checked, cleaned, prepared. Then, and only then, sent out to the noisy floor. The nucleus begins as a wall. But what it really becomes is control. Once that wall exists, the cell discovers something it never had before. Time. Not more time on the clock. Time between decisions. Before the nucleus, life worked like a street kitchen. The recipe book is open on the counter, and the moment a line is written, the cook starts cooking, no waiting, no editing, no second chances. That's fine when your recipes are simple. But now, the cell's instruction book is getting bigger and stranger. Some genes aren't clean sentences anymore. They are messy paragraphs, full of interruptions, extra pieces, fragments that don't belong in the final message. In the old world, that would be fatal. Because ribosomes don't care if the message is finished. They will grab it mid-copy, like a worker snatching blueprints while the architect is still drawing them, and then building the bridge anyway. You can guess how that ends. So inside the nucleus, the cell starts doing something that feels like an invention. It starts editing. RNA is made from DNA like a rough draft. But now, before that draft leaves the protected room, it gets cleaned up, trimmed, corrected, spliced into a final version that makes sense. And when the final message is ready, it gets stamped and sent out through the pores. The delay, copy, edit sport changes everything. Because now the cell can do more than just react. It can control when a gene speaks. It can keep certain instructions silent. It can release others only in the right conditions. The DNA stays the same, but the outcomes can be completely different. It's like having the same script and choosing different scenes, depending on what's happening outside. And this is the quiet superpower that will one day make complex bodies possible. Not because eukaryotes have magic genes, but because they can run genes like a program. The nucleus turns biology into something closer to software. Not just information, but information under management. And the more the cell learns to manage messages, the more ambitious it becomes. Because once you can trust the instructions, you can start building a bigger world inside. And that's where the story goes next. When the nucleus learned to manage messages, the cell stopped feeling like a bag of chemistry and started feeling like a place. A place with rooms, routes, departments. Because once information becomes controlled, the cell can finally do something that would have been too risky before. It can organize the chaos. Imagine the cell as a growing city. The nucleus is City Hall, quiet, guarded, making decisions. But a city hall is useless without roads. So the cell begins to build its roads out of membrane. Sheets of membrane spread through the cell like a soft internal web. They fold into corridors. They pinch off into tiny bubbles, vesicles that carry cargo like delivery trucks. Now, things don't just drift until they collide. They get shipped. Proteins can be stored instead of scattered. Chemicals can be stored instead of wasted. Damaged parts can be picked up, moved, recycled. And something even bigger happens. The cell starts assigning jobs. One area becomes good at building, another becomes good at packaging, another becomes good at transporting. This is division of labor inside a single cell. Before this, every part of the cell was basically doing everything at once. After this, the cell becomes a coordinated machine where different regions specialize, like departments in a company. And that's when the nucleus starts to feel less like a wall and more like a conductor. Because coordination is what separates a crowd from a team. The cell is no longer surviving by luck and speed alone. It's surviving by planning, by managing what gets built, where it goes, and when it happens. This is why eukaryotic life could scale upward, not just in size, but in complexity, because power gave the cell the budget, and the nucleus gave it the organization. And once a city exists inside the cell, the next question becomes unavoidable. How did this city begin? What was the first spark that created a nucleus at all? That's where the mystery depends. No one watched the nucleus being born. There is no fossil that says half a nucleus is still under construction. What we have are hints, patterns in modern cells, clues in genetics, designs that look like they were patched together under pressure. So scientists treat this like a cold case. Same crime scene. 3 main suspects. Suspect 1. The cell did it to itself. Membranes are always moving, folding, pinching, sealing. So one idea is that the other membrane kept folding inward, again and again, until it wrapped around the DNA like a protective jacket. In that story, the nucleus is a renovation, a safety upgrade, and the leftover folds didn't go to waste. They became the internal membrane network that later turns into the ER and Golgi. Suspect 2. The cell grew outward instead. This theory says the DNA stayed at the center, while the cell slowly expanded its living space around it, like a city growing outward from an old downtown. In that story, the nucleus isn't a new room built later. It's the original core. And the busy cytoplasm is the new neighborhood that formed around it. Suspect 3. The nucleus began as an intruder stick. Some viruses build compartments inside cells, little factories where they protect their DNA while they copy it. That raises an uncomfortable question. What if the first nucleus was born from a viral strategy and life eventually stole it? A parasite's invention turned into permanent architecture. Now, here is the honest ending to this mystery. We don't know which suspect is guilty. Maybe evolution used pieces of all three. But every theory agrees on the motive. DNA became too valuable to leave exposed, too complex to run without management, too vulnerable to risk in the open. So life built a protected room for its code. And once that room existed, there was no going back. Here is the real twist. The nucleus didn't make life more alive. It made life stable enough to become complicated. Before the nucleus, cells could be fast. They could be tough, they could adapt. But they couldn't afford to be messy. Because complexity without control is like a crowded airport with no schedules. Plans can exist, passengers can exist, but eventually everything crashes. The nucleus was the schedule. It turned DNA into protected property. It turned RNA into approved paperwork. It turned protein making into an organized workforce. And once that system existed, evolution could start building long-term, bigger genomes without falling apart, more switches without constant accidents, more internal machinery without total confusion. This is why eukaryotic cell can behave like tiny civilizations. They sort, shape, recycle, coordinate, and specialize. And here is where it stops being a science diagram. Because every cell in your body is running their ancient invention right now. When your skin heals, cells decide which genes to turn on. When your immune system responds, cells sense programs like shifting gears. When your brain forms a memory, gene activity shifts inside neurons, quietly rewriting proteins. That's the nucleus at work, not as a metaphor, but as a real control system. So when you hear nucleus, don't picture a dusty textbook circle. Picture the first time life built a command center. Not to become smarter, but to survive its own success. If you want more stories like this, where science unfolds like a thriller, subscribe to the Discovery Muse. Because out here, the biggest mysteries aren't fiction. They are written into life itself.